Hello?
Hi.
All right. So we'll probably cut out the first little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm gonna sound hella corny and cheesy, but I have to get my corny and cheesy voice on. You ready?
Okay, go. I'm gonna have such a hard time with this. Go.
All right. Welcome to the RentX ICO podcast, the self-proclaimed first podcast that's specifically designed around an ICO. It's a project we're working on called RentX, which is a decentralized rental network. And my name is Paul. I'm the co-founder and CEO, and I am with the Chief Architect, COO, web designer, iOS dev, pretty much a jack of all trades, Nell, who's with us. She only goes by Nell. She's going to be like the blockchain or the Beyonce of the blockchain space. And we're doing this podcast really to really just create a level of transparency and connection with our community that I don't think a lot of people are really doing a good job on. And, considering the implications that our project has, I thought it was really important that people not only know us, but know how we think about the project when we talk about it. So, Nell, thank you for joining me after 4 days of me bugging you to do a podcast with me.
You're welcome, Paul. You're very welcome.
So let's take it sort of back from the beginning. So we have an app called RentHoop, and it's a mobile app for finding rooms and roommates. And we're doing pretty well on that. Forbes just named us one of the most promising housing apps to watch in 2018. And then in January, you and Mo struck a chord with, oh my God, this blockchain ICO stuff is huge. And me being the non-technical guy, I was not involved in that at all. So tell me sort of, how you got involved in crypto blockchain first.
Yeah, so I think my involvement was always more into the whole theory, the whole systems, the tech side of things. Things started to blow up, obviously, like in the summer and fall, more in terms of investments and as a money-making tool. But I was always really passionate more so about the disruptive ability of blockchain technology. I mean, there's a lot. I feel like we're essentially on the brink of change. And when I first started to learn about the blockchain and about decentralization, what it really meant, it seemed like, oh, okay, this seems like it's going to be essentially the opening, the entry point into transitioning as a society towards a different way of working with each other, towards a different way of managing data, and just of growing projects, growing startups, growing companies. So yeah, I was more so very passionate about transparency, about democratizing certain things, though not all things, in my opinion, and just totally disrupting the ways that companies can grow, companies can start, and companies can communicate with their users, their customers, and how people can essentially regain control over their data. Those are kind of the concepts that first drew me into the space.
Okay, cool. So when you and Mo, who's our CTO, who I'll try and harass to get on a podcast as well, had this idea, how did it relate to what we were doing with the RentHoop? Of course, I know the answer, but for everyone who's listening who may not know about either project, how does Project RentX relate to RentHoop in any way?
Yeah, it seems like essentially RentX was a logical progression from RentHoop. So RentHoop was tackling a core problem, finding roommates, which is something that essentially everyone in this generation XYZ is facing or about to face. And it was really just a good way of coming in at essentially the bottom level pool of users to connect people with roommates, which is a really important task. But ultimately, there are bigger, broader, even more universal problems that reign over the real estate rental space. And those are always problems that I think many of us were concerned with or wanted to address and were passionate about addressing. It's just that RentHoop and roommates were the entry point for that. If you can help people find a roommate, then you can also help them find an apartment. And from there, and then you can help them cultivate a positive relationship with their landlord. And from there, things kind of tumble down. So RentX is the effort to bridge that. Okay, we've done a lot of work helping people pair up, essentially. Now, how can we help them through the next steps of the process? And more than that, not only how can we help them using the current system, but how can we devise a system that's better than the existing one to do these things? So it's not so much about leveraging like Zillow or Trulia with our users to help them find an apartment on a map and then have them go through the same tedious like paperwork, credit score checking, this, that, to find an apartment. It's about completely changing that process now. And just introducing them to a new, simpler way for them to go through their whole life as a renter. Yeah, I think that answers what you're saying.
I definitely think so. Okay, so that makes sense now as far as sort of, what inspired RentX. And, just to give my viewpoint real quick, I've been working on RentHoop for 4 years, and it started with just sort of Tinder for finding roommates-esque and has sort of evolved into a much more nuanced, complex product that is solving a really big problem. And one stat I think is super important that Nell sort of mentioned is the people living with roommates or family members has gone from 39% in 2005 to 55% in 2017. So it's a really big deal, and that was, I think, a really good place to us to start. And then with really the innovations in blockchain and what's happening, it was a really natural progression. So I think that's sort of the cool thing about it, and we're able to actually, contribute our 4 years of learnings to this new project that not many people, especially, real estate's very slow as far as tech and innovation, and so we're at the forefront of that. So I think that's really cool. Let's talk about the white paper. You are the chief architect of the white paper, and it's extremely well written. If you haven't read it yet, go on rentx.io, and that's RntX.io. Give me the short summary on the white paper and what we're building.
Yeah, so the white paper is really here to introduce the core, the foundational idea behind our protocol. So rather than being more of a business paper, it was really more written to be Satoshi style at its base. And it's really supposed to introduce users or community members to the idea of, okay, these are the real problems, to show that we're not essentially trying to pitch a solution to a non-existing problem, but we've really dug deep into the big problems that are international when it comes to finding a place to live. So it's really about digging into those, dissecting them and understanding, okay, what are the different aspects to those difficulties, and then introducing our core protocol, the RenterID, the RenterIQ, and the RenterScore, and how those things can come in and disrupt all of these problems and essentially help alleviate them or even entirely get rid of them. So RenterID, RenterIQ, RenterScore, those are the building blocks of the RentX network and the RentX protocol. They're essentially the primitives at base. And the idea is that we want to really focus on building this base. And in the white paper, I really wanted to focus on that because there's so many then different use cases and applications that can be built on top of that by RentX and even by other innovators in the space who want to leverage the groundwork we've done to create even maybe other disruptive use cases we're not even thinking about right now. So yeah, it really reads more less as a business plan or a monetizing strategy, because the point is to essentially help to start shifting the way we think about the way we're going to interact with landlords and allowing people the opportunity to just reimagine that interaction and put themselves in the position where RentX would exist and imagine how their life would change.
Okay, cool. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the three core functions of the protocol. RenterID, RenterIQ, and RenterScore. So start with the RenterID. Why for me, if I'm listening to this, and why is it important to me if I'm a renter? Why is a renter ID crucial? Why is RenterIQ, RenterScore? Why are those all things that would be great and to my benefit if I'm a renter?
Yeah, so I guess, let's start by going into them separately, and then I'll go into how they interact with each other. But the renter ID is, as the name, pretty self-obviously describes, a form of identity for a renter. So it allows you to identify yourself globally. That's one big thing because we're essentially used to national-based identification, right? So when you move countries, you essentially are dependent on a transformation of your previous identity rather than maintaining your current one. You've got to provide new kind of paperwork, or you're dependent on receiving some kind of like visa from your employer before you can even go in and look for a property. So the renter ID allows you to carry that renter identity all over the world and reuse it. So it saves you time on one end because you're essentially throughout our lives, we're resubmitting the same personal information like countless times. Every time we're moving to a place, we're applying maybe to like 15 different properties. You're resubmitting your personal information every single time. And if you actually really thought about how many, at the end of your life, how many properties or landlords own or have access to your personal information because you handed it to them, it's a ton. And you don't have any visibility as to what they're doing with that information afterwards. Are they really keeping it safe? Do they destroy it? Or do they not? Are you sure that they're not reselling it or using it for other purposes? You don't know any of that. You don't have control over any of that. You just give your paperwork and then you hope for the best. And so that's one problem that the renter ID aims to solve, right? You have total first control over who you give access to your renter ID. And they only have access to that for the sake of your application, right? So on one end, you now are more sure of where your information is traveling. And on the end of the landlord, too, that's less liability for them. That's less to worry about. It's less security infrastructure to have to worry about because now they don't have to think, okay, I've got to store these documents somewhere safe such that no one comes in to steal them or use them or et cetera. So less paperwork for the landlords, less worries for the landlords, and more control and transparency for you, and also borderless identity. So that's like one. Yeah, I think that's probably like the biggest issue that that a renter identity would solve within the context of renters and landlords.
So to sum it up into 3 points: data privacy, the option to control your data and see who has it. Like you said, it's easy for it to go into the wrong hands with how many properties you're submitting an application to. The reusability aspect, meaning you may never have to fill out the annoying dribble that you have to fill out each time you apply. And then also the last part is it's global. So us being able to give you an identity that is mobile, that you can go from Paris to Tokyo to Los Angeles, you still have that identity with you.
Yeah, and there's even, I mean, those really honestly graze the surface of identity with respect to renting, but there are so many other things that this will bring. I could go on for days about discrimination all over the world in terms of revealing your identity information, and then before even really being given a chance, you might be discriminated against on the basis of age, on the basis of sex, on the basis of race, whatever it be. And there's not much you can do. I mean, sure, laws exist in certain jurisdictions to protect you against that, but it's hard to prove that that's happening. Those things are often very, very subtle. So that's another big thing is being able to reveal just the information that is actually truly needed to figure out whether or not you are a good or could be a good renter, rather than handing away everything, your marital status, your just all this irrelevant information, and then leaving it up to other people to decide whether they like you or not. And people can discriminate pretty unfairly or make other renters essentially take priority over you, even if you might be a more solvent option.
Okay, so that's part one of the core protocol, identity. Talk about RenterIQ.
RenterIQ. Yeah, RenterIQ is essentially a store of behavior. It's your rental intelligence, kind of in more easy terms. But essentially, your RenterIQ comes in and collects all of your actions. So it could be anything from tracking your history of rental payments to make sure you're paying on time versus when you don't pay on time, when you're renewing your lease, how high your cost of rent is, how long you've been a renter, the history of your lease lengths, how the percentage of your security deposit that may or may not be returned. All of these small things essentially can get collected through the RenterIQ. And then all alone, they aren't necessarily essentially kind of useful. What makes them useful is the links that you can draw between them. And they serve essentially as a powerful base for data analysis to then be able to extract information as to your rental behavior and understanding whether you're a good renter, whether you're not a good renter. And you can get really detailed with this. You can really go into the detail of understanding, okay, someone who's had 12-month lease and misses one rent payment, they're probably still overall a good, or like is late on one payment, they're probably overall still a good renter, versus someone who only had to pay 2 months of lease and missed one of them of the two. That's probably a bad sign. You only had to commit to this for 2 months, and you messed up 50% of the time. So you can go into the nitty-gritty of really making that distinction.
Okay. So why do you think this is so important and such a big change from the current standard operating procedures that most landlords use or collect to actually judge tenants? Why is this better?
Yeah, so right now, the standard operating procedure, depending on the country you're in, will usually range from like credit score to perhaps some landlords will go so far as to call your previous landlord, but I've actually seen not too many of them do that. So they've got very limited amounts of information to go on, and so they do with what they can do, essentially. Like, they do with what they've got, rather. And so instead of having to rely on something like credit score, for example, where you essentially are being given this number that represents anything from like medical expenses to school loans to like your breast enlargement surgery 5 years ago, they're able now to go by information that's directly reflective of your actual value as a renter. Because, so everything is shaped by the RenterIQ. All of these actions and these behaviors actually make a lot of sense. So that's one pretty massive way in which landlords can benefit from this. And let me see, repeat the second part of your question, because I had a point on that too.
Well, I want to actually add on that, because I was talking to one of my friends who I used to work with, who's a bit older, and he made some probably not great judgment when it came to some decisions, and his credit score took a huge dip. And he had one landlord who took a chance on him, 5 or 6 years ago, and he's paid rent all the time, every month for 5 straight years. And he has really good references, people who actually like pick up the phone if you were to call them and say, hey, how is this person as a renter and whatnot. And, in the case that for some reason, the landlord passed, or they didn't pick up the phone, or they were out of the country, or they, just didn't get your call, or whatever it was, having some sort of record that says, hey, this person has paid rent for 5 straight years is a pretty good sign that this person is at least going to pay you rent every month, as opposed to relying on a credit score, which isn't necessarily reflective, like you said, of someone being a good renter or being able to pay rent on time. And we've done obviously tons of research with property managers and landlords, and one of our friends, Sarah, who's worked at a couple big property management companies and a small one, said, it's really hard to tell who's going to be a good renter or not. You think someone comes in and on paper they look like, high credit score, all this sort of stuff, and then, they totally forget to pay rent, or they don't even pay rent, and there's, a whole thing that goes on. And so I think this IQ part is really, really important, and anyone who's a landlord or a renter is going to benefit from it as long as you're taking the right action and paying your rent on time every month, which I think is a totally fair thing to do.
Right. And then again, like reusability is another big thing here. You'll build these excellent track records in one property, and then you move to another property literally down the street. It could be down the street, could be across the world. But either way, all of that behavior that you exhibited that might have been great gets totally lost because it was never accounted for or recorded in any kind of concrete way. So reusability, being able to port that behavior, as you said, for your friend who was who paid on time for 5 years straight, to then the next person, and then creating this chain of events throughout your lifetime is pretty huge, especially when you're moving across borders, because it's even harder moving countries to find an apartment because, people know that you're a foreigner. They don't know essentially what to judge you based on. You don't necessarily have local references that you can send to them. Okay, well, now you have this, which is pretty universal. We pay for rent everywhere in the world to show for yourself, which is pretty great.
Yep, agreed. Okay, let's talk about RenterScore.
Yes. So RenterScore brings all of this together, right? So the RenterScore then is actually what taps into the RenterIQ information and generates a score. And it's supposed to essentially be a metric that's more fair. First of all, it's fair because it reflects stuff that's actually relevant to your value as a renter. It's dynamic. It's not fixed. It's not a one-time number. It will change over your lifetime and as your behaviors evolve and change and as you accrue your account accrues maturity. It's trustworthy and it's transparent. You know what goes into the score, right? You have access and you have control over all of your information. So it's not at all anymore unclear what you're being judged on versus, again, back to the credit score where there's all these proprietary algorithms. No one knows how a credit score is actually calculated. We have like a very general idea, but you don't know what information really is going into that. It's essentially the culmination of everything we want to demonstrate and how we want to help renters and landlords in easy to read metric. And the algorithms that back that can do anything from assign a relative weight to different lease terms that you've had to calculate, how often you pay rent on time, how often you renew, all of that. And then a huge part of it is that it's open source, right? So anyone can tap into this and use it for their own purposes. And we've essentially thought heavily about, okay, do we want to make this universal score that is calculated in a very rigid way? Or do we want to make something that can essentially be modulated based on preference? Because the factors ultimately that a landlord in France cares about are going to be different from the factors that maybe a landlord in Japan or South America or the United States cares about. And so it's important to create a metric that is dynamic and that you can shape it based on you can shape it based on the factors that matter to you most. Maybe you care about lease renewal more than you care about paying rent on time for whatever reason. I don't know. So if you want more weight on that, you could essentially assign more weight on that. So it's creating a score that really is tailored to fit its market.
Awesome. Okay. So those are the three main protocols. Now let's talk about sort of the ICO blockchain stuff about it. Talk about what are the tokens going to be used for?
Yes. So you've got essentially a bunch of use cases now when you bring together the core protocols and they work together that can be implemented. So for example, you can use your RenterID combined with your RenterScore to send a rental application, right? So now you have all of your identity information being sent for this application plus a score to show that you are a good renter and have a good history of being a good renter. And you can send these applications using tokens rather than paying like $50 for an application fee, which is usually, I'd say the average cost, at least in the U.S., will be anywhere from like $20 to $100 depending on the property you're applying to, and you're not even sure whether you'll get a good positive feedback or whether you'll get accepted. So that's one big use case for these tokens, is processing applications. Another big use case would be essentially just incentivizing you to be a good renter, and landlords also rewarding you for being a good renter. So network-powered rewards work in such a way that, for example, let's say I have paid my rent on time for 12 months straight. I haven't caused any trouble in the property. I've maintained my apartment really well. My landlord loves me. We have a good relationship. And I'm now at the end of my lease, and I'm wondering whether or not I should renew or maybe try another property. Your landlord could incentivize you to stay by maybe using tokens, giving you essentially a monthly discount on your rent, or maybe offering you a home cleaning service through tokens. So it's essentially incentivizing you through rewards, through services, using RentX tokens. So that's another big one. And then the network can reward you for positive actions point blank without your landlord having to do anything. So just positive behaviors like paying rent on time. You receive a certain amount of tokens every month that then you can use to prorate your own rent or to buy or get access to services. That's another, number two, I guess, big use for that. And then this is something that we're still playing with and essentially really discussing more in depth, but how security deposits work is another big thing. You could essentially use tokens to essentially put down a security deposit, except instead of having this fixed money in a bank account that doesn't move for 1 year and it's just locked funds with no purpose, you could accrue interest over your tokens through time, such that at least your money is doing something for you. It's essentially giving value back to you. So that's another use case. There's a lot more that we could go into, but I think those are three big appealing ones.
Yeah. There's tons of use cases for a token like this, or in an ecosystem like this. I think the big question that I've been getting, and I know you've been getting it too, will you ever be able to pay rent in tokens?
So that, I would say yes. It's going to be contingent on the growth of cryptocurrencies as a whole, and essentially seeing, as we see more bigger adoption of cryptocurrencies by third parties, such as maybe the day that Amazon will start or has started accepting payments in cryptocurrencies, then we're going to see a bigger propensity to accept tokens as a form of payment for various things and outside services by landlords. So the ability to essentially pay your rent in crypto, I think, is going to be, it's up and coming. And you have the release even of Coinbase's payment system now. So you've got a pretty trusted company offering a payment system. That's a huge incentivizer for us, for example, because it shows, okay, now that you have these trusted people offering these payment systems that can be integrated into other people's websites and et cetera, we're more likely to be able to then offer services such as paying your rent using tokens. So I think that it definitely is something that will evolve in the future as we continue to build trust within our community and within the landlord community, and as a whole, as the crypto and blockchain space grows.
Okay, so not today, maybe not tomorrow, but sometime soon. It's on the horizon.
Right, it's coming, and it's also even bigger than the RentX token, right? So the RentX token can be used to pay for rent and earn incentivization rewards, but even bigger than that, even if you decided maybe, okay, well, I want to make my rental payment in Bitcoin, for example, that's still, all of this is still trackable, and all of this is still recordable to your RenterIQ. So, all of these different ways of transacting can still be recorded, and that's the beauty of all of this.
Okay, now let me ask you another hard-hitting question that my parents will ask. Is this a business? How do we make money? I don't know. I feel like it's at least important to address, right? Because there are older people who are like, like, how does this Bitcoin crypto stuff work? Like, does anybody make money? Like, how would we make money doing this?
Yeah, so essentially, because at the core, we're essentially a protocol, and we give access essentially to this whole RenterID, RenterIQ, RenterScore. As I said, there are so many different use cases and applications that people can come and build on top of. You can build all kinds of decentralized applications using these things, or that tap into these things. And essentially, a lot of it is going to come from these microtransactions of people who build or need to tap into someone's renter score. So I'm a real estate company that wants to use the RentX renter score in order to verify my applicants. Okay, every time I tap into someone's renter score, essentially a transaction fee is paid. So it's really going to be in the wealth of rental transactions that happen every single day. And using these core components that we're creating in order to facilitate your own business, that we're going to see a lot of, I think, company value and company growth. So rather than us, which I think is more exciting, I think it's because we're essentially creating a community of renters, it's incentivizing for landlords to come in and tap into this community and essentially reach out to them to be able to fill their vacant spots and be able to discover whether or not they're good renters by getting access to their renter score. Those are all huge drivers and huge incentivizers that are going to really grow the value of the company.
Right. And one thing I'll add on that too is I think one of the biggest benefits is pretty much a renter's ability to leverage their value that they've built up to other landlords, almost like a free, like in sports, hashtag sports. If you're a basketball player and you've been a really good basketball player, once your lease ends, once your contract ends, and you're out on the market and you're looking for a new place, and you have a really high rental score that displays that, okay, you pay your rent on time every month, there's a certain number of metrics to where you hit with flying colors, and when you apply for properties from now on, landlords are basically going to be begging for you to stay in their property versus someone who may not have a rental score. And so you're going to be able to get greater lease concessions. You're going to get better service. You're going to be able to leverage this goodwill that you've already built. And I think for landlords, that's a very interesting value proposition too, because from the landlords that we talk to, there's really two things that are on their mind. One, are you going to pay rent every month, hopefully on time? And the other being, are you going to screw up the place or mess with the neighbors? And as long as you're not really as long as you really, as a renter, you do those two things, pay rent and not mess with the place or the neighbors or anything like that, you're a great renter. And you should be able to leverage that to get a better deal at your next place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's again, like a big ocean for landlords. And it's a big opportunity for landlords to even spend less money on advertising and on marketing, because now they can directly come and find renters with certain renter scores or above that they want. And rather than spending a ton of money marketing to a pool of people from whom they have no idea if they'll even get one match, or if they don't really know if they're really advertising to the right people, well, why not target those marketing efforts from the get-go directly to people who fit your standards, fit your requirements, fit your needs. So you're saving a lot of money as a landlord, essentially, by going through something like this and being able to pre-screen ahead of time, right? You could even go so far as to hold like an open house where you invite only people qualify prior to hosting anything, versus now you hold an open house and you kind of just hope the right people will walk in. So it really allows for more targeted efforts and targeted use of resources for landlords as well.
Yep, absolutely. So we've talked about a lot. Is there anything else you want to touch on as far as this project is concerned?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would want to say is that, there's a big focus right now on growing growing in the crypto space and in the blockchain space in terms of scalability, in terms of figuring out the basics that need to be figured out. And there's so many great people working on this, and it's so exciting. And so applications like ours, I think, kind of come down the line as we're figuring out the core stuff, right? And so that's why our focus, I think, right now is really going to be figuring out the protocol and the RenterID and the RenterIQ and the RenterScore, because then all of those applications that can be built on top of it can come after. So I kind of just want to emphasize just how important it is to get that development work done, and that's what we really care about, is really building on the utility that we're promising. And we really want to build this, and we really want to make it accessible for everyone. You know, the idea isn't to have this small community of people who are privately benefited so much as like the goal ultimately is to spread all over the world and to actually disrupt and to just change the way people interact with their landlords and their roommates and everyone. So yeah, essentially kind of focusing at the base is our point. So let me think. Yeah, I don't want to swear, but like we essentially we're not about bullshit, and we don't want to bullshit, and we really want to be as clear with everyone as we can and to kind of figure all of this out together and take our time doing it rather than giving a bunch of answers that are ultimately not necessarily true or reflective of the blockchain space as it is today. And it's going to be a growth process as we work with our community in figuring out the answers to certain questions and refining the protocol. And we're really excited about that. We're really excited to get people excited with us and help us ask more difficult questions and find answers to them.
Awesome. Well, I think that's very well said. And for people who are interested in finding out more about the project, you can go on rentx.io, and that's RntX.io. And on our social channels, Telegram, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, all that sort of stuff, it's Project RentX, and that's Project
MySpace?
PRO. Yeah, you know, for the kids out there on MySpace, we actually don't have a MySpace, but I do think that would be, I mean, since we have the first ICO branded podcast, we might as well have the first ICO branded MySpace page. I think that would be really great, actually. Yeah. So I will definitely bleep out the very vulgar curse words used at the end, and we will add some music in here as well. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to reach out to me or Nell on Telegram, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.